G'day you guys, welcome to this episode of the Goss. Today I sit down with my dad and we talk about the gossip, the news that is going on down under in Australia but also worldwide. Obviously we talk about the coronavirus to try and give you an update on the situation there in Australia and talk about a few stories going on, down under relating to the coronavirus. There have been some definitely interesting stories about panic buying continuing and people busing into rural towns in order to strip the shelves bare of their supermarkets. We also talk about a bunch of serious topics, including anti-vaxxers, so people who are against vaccines. We also talk about a white supremacist who was arrested in New South Wales after allegedly planning a terror attack. Then we get onto the topic of pedophile priests in the Catholic Church and a man named Vincent Ryan who has just been convicted of abusing 2 more children, making his number of victims something like 35. We talk about the SAS soldiers who have been accused of committing war crimes in Afghanistan. And, you know, if war crimes are an unavoidable part of going to war. And then lastly, we talk about genetically modified cows. So these are dairy cows that have been genetically modified in Australia to not grow horns. And we talk about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, more broadly as well. So there's lots in this episode, guys. Don't forget, if you want the full transcript, you want the full video, you want to be able to learn and consume all of this episode's material, as well as all the other podcasts and Goss episodes, sign up for the premium podcast or sign up for the academy at aussieenglish.com.au. Without any further ado, guys, kick the kookaburra and let's get into it. Dad, what's going on?
Hey, Pete. Hey, topic of the week, coronavirus.
I know, Jesus.
But the Australian Football League starts tonight and it's been on again, off again for the last couple of weeks. But the AFL have decided that they're going to run round 1, but with no spectators. So this is as close as I'm going to get to supporting my team this week, watching it on television. But
do you think that's a good idea?
Hey, I'll get this crap off. I'll leave the hat on. It's way too hot.
Yeah, exactly. It's way too warm.
Yeah.
That was a scarf for anyone who's not watching the video. So would you want to talk about that too quickly? Why does AFL and rugby in Australia, I mean, I don't know what it's like elsewhere in the world, but in Australia we sell merchandise like scarves.
Yeah.
Why is a scarf a thing?
It's a winter sport.
Yeah.
So
but we don't do it for, basketball or...
No, but basketball's an indoor game. We now have indoor football given that one of our stadia has got a roof on it, but I think it just comes from that old tradition of, going to the football decades ago when, it's the middle of winter, it's pouring with rain, it's cold, it's windy, so you wore jackets and scarves. And so clubs have just kept that going.
Yeah, it's funny. So what's happening with the AFL?
Yeah, I said round 1 starting this week. In fact, starts tonight. Normally they'd have 70 to 80,000 people at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. They'll have about 100 and none of those are spectators. They're just, running the stadium. And of course the 2 clubs will be there, but no spectators. It's a bit weird.
What, staying about 1.5 meters away from each other at all times?
That could be a challenge, if they add an extra rule to the football where you're not allowed to tackle and you've got to stay 1.5 meters away from people. But I mean, that's a bit of a joke, but it's quite serious in the general sense. But a lot of sports have chosen not to play. I know that a couple of sports in America have just cancelled. They're not playing at all.
Yeah.
Whereas at least the AFL and the NRL, the National Rugby League, are playing but with no spectators until they decide otherwise.
What seems so funny, I thought we could smash out all the corona stuff and get into the other stories because people are probably a bit fatigued with hearing coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is interesting seeing all the ramifications, right? Because you don't expect, there's an epidemic of, a flu virus that goes around the world and therefore the football season's going to be heavily disrupted. People won't be able to see the football and there'll be fewer games as well.
Yeah,
right?
They've reduced the season from 22 games to 17 games plus the finals still. But
Yeah.
so that's they've done that not so much as a health risk thing, but given that that'll now give them 5 weeks up their sleeve in the season, and if they have to cancel, they won't have to cancel the whole season. They can just put it off for a few weeks to see what happens and still complete what they set up to do at the beginning.
And what else is going on? There's the Olympics, which is being thought of being cancelled. I'm not sure what the deal is there, but that's in July, right?
That's in July.
18 weeks out?
Yeah, and I don't know, obviously, but I think the IOC will leave it as late as possible to call that. They're not going to cancel now and have sort of egg on their face when everything's okay in July. So I think they'll leave it until the last few weeks.
Japan's been doing really well too. I was listening to
no surprise
some news, and they had, I think after they got to 100 cases within the next week, as they were doing a sort of comparison of all the different countries, Japan only had, after 7 days, 200 cases, whereas Australia, I think, had over 500 in that same period. And it's gone crazy over in Italy and Spain.
Yeah,
I think yesterday, more than almost 500 people died in Italy overnight from the virus.
I know.
So what other things? There's things like small businesses are getting really disrupted, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of there's obviously now restrictions on crowds. So you can't run an event that is going to have more than 500 people at it, and that's the regulation that the government have brought in. So you're actually breaking the law if you do it.
That's an outdoor event, right?
That's an outdoor.
500 is outdoor, 100 is
indoors, and they're suggesting less than that would be the ideal.
Yeah,
which is obviously why the AFL and the NRL have gone down, saying we're just not going to have spectators, but we'll still have the game on television. Large restaurants are affected. Small cafes are probably still okay because they're unlikely to have 100 people in them. But many people are not going to them anyway, so they're affected indirectly in a sense. They're not being banned from trading, but nobody's going to them.
Well, they're not being in trouble with. They're not in trouble with numbers, but they have fewer people coming in to buy things, and therefore the casual staff that they have don't get shifts. Yeah. They can't pay their rent.
Yeah.
So, and the people who are renting their houses or their places where there are businesses aren't going to receive the money because of that. So
I heard this morning that that Qantas have asked 35,000 of their staff to take a month's leave without pay.
Yeah,
they can take it as annual leave if they've got annual leave, but because they are just running far fewer services, very few people are flying now, so they don't need people on the ground or on the phone or in administrative offices and so on. So that's Qantas is one of the biggest companies we have.
Do you think that's fair of them to do that without paid leave?
Well, the choice they have is that they continue to keep people on doing nothing because some of those people, if you're an operational person at an airport, there's nothing for you to do. You're not multi-skilled to go and take on another job in the meantime. And if they keep paying them, then in the end, it's going to cost them billions of dollars in the long term. And I think they've done it as a risk management tool to just say, look, in the short term, let's try this and hope that we can get back to normal in a few weeks. But because the alternative is they end up going broke and have to sack everyone.
Anyway, it seemed, there was...
Do you want to take a small hit or the chance of a much bigger hit?
I think there were some politicians raging up about that because they were being forced to use their, what's it called? Like the long-term leave that they save up.
Long service leave.
Long service leave for when they're potentially going to retire and get a payout for the long service leave.
Which is not what long service leave is intended to be done. Long service leave is intended as you've worked for 10 years with just your normal leave, and therefore you're entitled to a longer period of leave. It's intended to be taken every 10 years. It's not intended to be saved up for retirement. The one that is probably the most annoying is that casinos seem to have an exemption from the crowd thing.
How does that work?
The cynic in me would suggest that governments love getting they get a huge amount of tax revenue from casinos, but you've got small businesses, restaurants right next door to Crown Casino in Melbourne, who are having to close because they can take more than 100 people, and they can't sort of suddenly go, oh, we've got 99 reservations, we're not going to allow anybody else in the building. Whereas the casino, which would have thousands of people in it at any one time, is allowed to operate. And they're in the same building effectively. It's a bit bizarre.
Yeah. I guess other updates are that, we've been warned to brace for a 6-month lockdown, right, which we haven't seen since World War II.
Right.
Which is just going to be a lot of self-isolation.
Self-isolation, only emergency travel.
Yeah, or to the shops.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the closure of public services and buildings like museums, concerts, cultural events. Bunnings sausage sizzles are closing down.
Yeah.
Office staff are told to work from home. Families are urged to avoid visiting their elderly relatives.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, the elderly are, certainly the most vulnerable, not the only vulnerable people in the population, but they're the most vulnerable to this disease.
Yeah.
The downside of that, of course, is that if you're an elderly person and you're in a home, a nursing home, then loneliness is the thing that, yes, you might have other people around you, staff and other residents, but if you don't have family coming to visit you, and this could go on for weeks or months, then mental health issues for elderly is going to be a big problem, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so Australia's had now 6 deaths.
Yeah.
5 in New South Wales, 1 in WA.
And that was the first one.
Yeah, and we've had almost 600 people infected. It's probably above 600 today. I'm not sure what
and I think we've hit every state now. So.
Yeah, that's and territory.
And territories. Yeah.
And it looks like it's likely to cost the economy $1 trillion worldwide, says the UN Trade and Development.
It'll be more than that, I suspect. That in reality, we've already had probably a $500 billion hit to stock markets around the world. Now, that's not costing anything to the economy, but it's costing people's investments. So,
how do you feel about that? Because I know that you have a lot of investments. Yeah, well,
my superannuation is more than 50% tied up in shares, and so my superannuation now is probably worth 20% less than what it was 2 months ago.
And you'd spent, 10 years recovering from the last recession, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In 2008.
Yeah.
So what is that going to have in terms of roll-on effects with people?
That just means that I'm going to have a smaller amount of money to live off.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to have to go back and find part-time work just to keep propping it up.
So any other points, I guess, to make on coronavirus? There have been some vaccine trials in humans that have begun. I think in the US, there have been 45 volunteers to get the vaccine from Kaiser Permanente Washington Research Institution. They have to get 2 injections over 28 days. And I assume they're just going to see if these people then contract or don't contract the virus. I'm sure they're not going to infect them with it.
Well, I mean, the typical trial would be that they would infect them.
Really?
But
Jesus.
for a deadly disease, you're not likely to do that.
Yeah.
Either that or they're finding people in the lowest risk category. And I saw the headline for that story, but I haven't read any details of it. So, of what the tests actually involve. But typically, because at the moment, let's look at Australia as an example, 25 million people, and we've had about 500 cases. So we're dealing with a very, very small chance of getting the disease in the next few weeks, just based on, the likelihood of coming in contact with it. So if I were to go off and get a vaccination trial and I wasn't exposed to the disease, it could be 3 months before I might get exposed to it. In which case, how are they going to tell whether it's useful or not? So, it's a challenging one. But look, it's one of those risks that as a society we have to take if we're going to develop a vaccine. But yes, you don't want to put people's lives in danger to be able to test for it.
Well, I didn't realize too how much there is involved, because vaccines can have side effects where they can trigger your immune system. I think there was something, I don't remember the specifics, but there was something where there was a vaccine released. I can't remember if it was for measles or something else. And when people received it, I think they were immune to measles, but then it did something to their immune system and made them more susceptible to something else later on, so that it is a very nuanced thing that takes time. You can't just rush it out worldwide.
Typically, vaccines take a decade to come out.
Yeah.
Other than things like the flu vaccines, which we're so good at creating those on an annual basis now.
Well, I'm sure we're just modifying them though, right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
There and you just tinker with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a brand new thing. So.
Yeah. I was watching a TV show called Pandemic, How to Prevent an Outbreak, which I'm sure, not by chance, was suggested to me on Netflix. And
funny about that.
The thing in that really surprised me was that in Oregon, the state of the United States of America, they have a huge anti-vaxxer movement.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea how big of a thing it was there, and the ignorance in terms of what vaccines are, how they work, how they're created blows my mind, because you had these, ironically, it seemed to always be mums didn't often seem to be men or dads saying, yeah, I'm an anti-vaxxer, but it would be these mums that were sort of new-aged, hippie kind of mums raising kids on, large properties with lots of animals and veggies. And they would be like, well, I would prefer that my kids just play outside and develop their natural immunity.
Which is a good thing, but you do the vaccination in addition to that.
Yeah. Well, do you want to talk about how that obviously doesn't work in terms of becoming immune to diseases like measles or even the coronavirus
well, you have
now?
to be, your immune system works on the basis that you have to be exposed to a disease or a pathogen, which is causing the disease, and then it develops an immunity to it, assuming that you survive.
Yeah.
And things like measles, and in the past things like polio and smallpox and so on have a reasonably high death rate. And so, I had measles as a child. I got very sick, but that was before measles vaccines were really available.
Wow, you had measles. I don't think I knew that.
No, I had measles when I was a child. I was 6 or 7 years old.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I do.
What was it like?
Sick.
But I mean, what were your memories of, because I remember getting chickenpox and going through that process, but I imagine that measles is chickenpox on steroids.
Yeah, it is. And obviously you don't have the itchy sores on you, but you come out in this rash all over your body. Yeah. You've got a high temperature. You feel, you feel like you've got a severe dose of the flu. You're really just knocked about. And I was probably knocked around for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you don't want that, obviously. So that whole idea of having natural immunity, yes, you'll get natural immunity to normal pathogens that are available and around in your area. So you're not going to get, unless you get exposed to chickenpox or measles or any of those sort of things, you're not going to develop an immunity to it. Immunity is not a general thing.
Yeah.
You become immune to every single pathogen by your immune system working against it, and
you need to come in contact with it in order to actually develop
to develop the immunity, because your body develops antibodies specific to every pathogen, and that's why we have to keep taking. You'd think, I've had a flu vaccine. But the flu virus, as we've already spoken to her in round 1 of this series, is it evolves very quickly. It's a very simple virus, and it's so prevalent that it evolves very quickly. Whereas things like measles doesn't.
It's effectively like that virus has 2 locks, 3 locks on the outside of it, and your immune system has 3 keys that can fit into those locks, and if you unlock it, you kill it. But the problem is that each year it can mutate one of the locks and it changes, and you have to keep up by making new keys, right? To keep up
good
with
analogy.
Yeah. Well, what was it like, though, growing up with things like measles and polio being obviously something very I think there's a guy who's still in an iron lung who had polio as a kid. And so I think from my limited understanding, it affects your nervous system so that you can't walk properly and you may not be able to breathe.
And the iron lung is because you can't breathe.
And so the iron lung is effectively this big machine that I think changes the pressure inside of it to open your lungs up. But your body has to be effectively kept inside up to your neck. And you can't really get out for very long at all if you can't
get out at all.
Breathe. Yeah. So having that as a real threat when you were growing up, was there an anti-vaxxer movement?
Look, there really wasn't. It's sort of the anti-vaxxer thing has become it's sort of a new thing, really.
Was it religious initially, if there was any?
Well, there are some religions that are opposed to vaccinations, and mostly those religions are not opposed to vaccinations specifically. They're opposed to medical intervention.
It's like Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jehovah's Witnesses won't take blood transfusions. They
don't want
organ donations. They don't even want surgery mostly. So, vaccination is just considered as another one of those medical interventions. I think the modern anti-vaxxer thing has come out of, who knows where, but it's come out of this sort of postmodern thing of saying, well, I just want to get back to nature and be natural. And then it seemed to have run a second course of that with a bunch of sort of B-grade celebrities deciding they're going to support people who are saying, vaccines cause autism. Yeah. No, they don't. Look at the research.
Well, and that doctor who published that
Yeah.
research was later completely disgraced,
Yes,
and that
exactly.
that research was
But he
shown
still
to be
keeps
completely
getting
flawed.
quoted by,
Yeah.
as I say, these, B-grade celebrities. But, who
Well, and
prefer
the-
to believe a B-grade celebrity on television than the World Health Organization?
To pause you there, I would rather my kid had autism and was alive than had measles and died.
Yes.
So even if it was the case that there was a high
it isn't,
proportion
but yeah, I know.
of children
Yeah, it's
receiving autism, it's kind of like, well,
bizarre.
okay, at least they're not getting measles or polio, smallpox, whatever other diseases that would kill them, which
Yeah.
autism doesn't do, even if it was the case.
I
that
know.
vaccines
It
caused
is bizarre. And look, the other side of that too is that vaccination is not just a personal choice.
Yeah.
Because we need herd immunity for the people who, for various, and there's a very small percentage of the population who simply cannot take some vaccines. They're allergic to the medium that they goes into, or they have a really compromised immune system.
Well, they've got chemo at the moment, from
chemotherapy
cancer.
for cancer, which again compromises your immune system. So they can't get vaccinated. The
Yeah.
only way they can survive is if very few people are around carrying the disease. And so it's almost the social responsibility side of vaccination that is as important and seems to be just forgotten about. People wave their little anti-vaxxer flag as this is, my personal choice. But
I think that freaks me out more, though, is the lack of interest in science and evidence
now you're going to wind me up.
to develop your opinions about something like vaccines. And on the other side of that, the thing that frustrates me more is the amount of confidence these people have that they know more than, say, an educated doctor or
they
someone
know more
who
than
creates
the World
vaccine.
Health Organization or the chief medical officers in the country they live in, or even their general practitioner. It's a bizarre sense of self-confidence that is based on nothing but hearsay.
Yeah.
And it's about science education and understanding that we make decisions in our lives based on evidence.
Yeah.
And what does evidence mean? And I'm sorry, but hearsay, an opinion, an anecdote is not evidence. Even if the anecdote is true,
Yeah.
that's the 1 in a million potentially, 1 in a billion,
I think
as opposed to
that's the thing that gets me,
scientific
because
research that is examining the other options.
In this doco, I saw a lot of people giving evidence when they were trying to pass the bill that would mandatorily cause people to have to get vaccines in Oregon. And there were a lot of just these, I had it and I got a severe rash in my arm, and so all vaccines shouldn't be forced on anyone. Like, it seemed to be a lot of that anecdotal evidence of like, I once knew someone whose child had this happen to them, so I don't want any other child to have to get it.
No.
It just blows my mind. But do you think that this epidemic or pandemic now that's spread everywhere, do you think that's going to change a lot of the anti-vaxxers' minds? Do you think we're going to have a movement?
Look, I don't want to use, obviously, a potentially the most dramatic thing that has happened in our lives to the world from a health point of view, certainly since HIV. I don't want to use that as to be sort of flippant or cynical, but I would almost guarantee you that there'll be a whole bunch of anti-vaxxers queuing up for the vaccine for this virus when it gets created, because all of a sudden they've been exposed to the media constantly banging on for weeks at the moment. It'll be months by the time the vaccine gets released, if not a year or more by the time the vaccine gets released. They'll have had the media banging on about this is horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible, this is how to prevent getting it, this is how to prevent getting it. And all of a sudden they're going to go, well, I'm not going to get the measles vaccine, but I'll go and get this vaccine. Yeah. And so,
it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
There was on the note of famous people and jumping on the anti-vaxxer bandwagon or trying to get back to natural, nature and everything like that. Miranda Kerr, did you see what she ended up doing?
No.
So Miranda Kerr is a very famous Victoria's Secret model from Australia, I guess, and she has an Instagram with something like 12.2 million followers, and she shared a guide on how to deal with the coronavirus from medical medium Anthony William. So it was all about effectively drinking more celery juice. Do you think celebrities like this should face repercussions for this sort of...
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. What do you think should be done? Because, it is, you have a disproportionate amount of influence.
I just think Google should just cancel her account.
Yeah.
And because, let's face it, she's got 12 point something million followers because she looks good, not because she's a spokesperson on health issues. And so when she comes out and starts making those statements, she has to be held accountable for it. And there's no legal way of dealing with that unless somebody can prove that following her advice and being reasonably influenced by her has caused them to have some negative side effect. And let's face it, who's going to sue her because she's got far more money than the average person has, so she'll last in court a lot longer. But they have to be held accountable to the point where if you're going to abuse social media, you shouldn't be allowed to use it. And they're never going to do it because, let's face it, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube are going to much rather have her with their 12 million followers than me with my 12,000 followers.
G'day, mate. That was the first half of this episode of The Goss. If you would like to continue watching or continue listening to this episode, make sure that you sign up for the premium podcast or academy memberships at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get full access to these entire episodes of this series and much, much more. You can go check that out using the links below or just go to aussieenglish.com.au. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, mate, and I will see you next time. Peace.